Hello, Wayneman's here. This video presents number 2 of 6 cases as to why the Jewish people claim the land of Israel. They believe the Jewish people have maintained ties to their historic homeland for more than 3,700 years. I want to encourage you to do your own research regarding this subject and to likewise find truth for yourself. Now, to help you during your research, this video will present several historical facts that coincide with scriptures in the Bible. Let's go way back in history, about 3,500 years ago, and talk about Israelite settlements in Canaan. A cornerstone of Judaism occurred in the 13th century BCE, according to biblical chronology. The 12 Jewish tribes went from Canaan to Egypt and eventually became slaves to the Pharaoh. Led by Moses, they eventually emerged from Egyptian bondage and journeyed to the land that God had promised to their first patriarch, Abraham. The first recorded extra-biblical mention of Israel can be found on an artifact called the Mernetha stele. Inscriptions on this stone records where the Egyptian ruler Mernetha boasted of his military victory over Israel. The gradual decay of Egyptian authority allowed the Israelites to gain a foothold in the region, and the land was divided among 12 tribes known as the children of Israel. The tribe of Judah, the descendants of Jacob's oldest son, received the largest portion of the land, which was located in the south. Each of the remaining tribes had a section that extended northward and eastward into modern-day Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. A long period of strife continued for the Israelites, this time with a formidable enemy called the Philistines. However, there was strife between the Israelite tribes also. The Philistines were seafaring people from the Aegean region of the Mediterranean. As such, they were not a national state headed by a single ruler, but a confederacy of city-states. From modern archaeology, it has been verified that they initially ruled on the coastal region of Gaza, Ascalon, and Ashdod. And one of the many battles between the Israelites and the Philistines was the battle between David and Goliath, a well-known Bible story. The Philistines disappeared from history when the Babylonians took over in 586, but their name still lives on. And more can be learned about the Philistines by going to the website gsjp.org and listening to the podcast entitled The Jews, Occupiers or Owners? It's a modern day hot topic. Now let's talk about the Israelite kingdoms 1000 to 720 BCE. 10 of the 12 tribes formed a northern kingdom and called it Israel. The 2 remaining tribes became the kingdom of Judah and were located in the south with Jerusalem as its capital. The Syrians destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel approximately 720 BCE. Archaeologists have discovered a bas-relief showing Jehu, king of Israel, bowing before the Assyrian king Shalmaneser III. The legendary Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar invaded the southern kingdom of Judah in 586 BCE. He destroyed Jerusalem and Solomon's temple and took most of the Israelite people as captives. The Jewish people were scattered across the 4 corners of the world, by these conquerors, just as God had declared through his prophets. And the first of two scatterings of the Jews is described by a Greek word, diaspora. In 536 BCE, 50 years after the first diaspora, the Persians defeated the Babylonians. The Persian king Cyrus then permitted the Jewish exiles to return to their former kingdom in Judah. Ezra and Nehemiah rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem as well as a second temple on the site of the original one. The Cyrus cylinder artifact, currently housed in the British Museum, validates Cyrus's edict. Now let's discuss the Israelite and the Greek and Roman Empire, 332 to 135 CE. Over the next centuries, the Israelite people struggled against the Greek and Roman empires. In the early stages, the Israelites had a fair amount of freedom while under the jurisdiction of Alexander the Great. As harsher treatment transpired from Alexander's successors, the Israelite communities revolted while being led by the Hasmoneans, or the Maccabees. It was during this period of Roman oppression in the 1st century CE that Jesus Christ came to earth. His arrival directly coincides with multiple prophecies in the Bible, some of which occurred centuries before his arrival. Now, the Romans delivered two crushing blows to the Jewish people. The first devastation came in 70 AD when Titus, the son of the Emperor Vespasian, ended a 4-year battle with the Jews by destroying Jerusalem and the Second Jewish Temple. The Ark of Titus, currently located in Rome, commemorates this Roman victory. The Romans' second blow to the Jewish people in Israel followed their uprising known as the Bar Kokhba Revolt. It was crushed by the Emperor Hadrian, and the Romans' vengeance on the Jewish people was severe. The Romans laid waste the land of Judea, plowed the site of the temple, and barred Jews from Jerusalem. They killed hundreds of thousands of Judeans and enslaved or sold many others. A second diaspora began, more far-reaching than that rendered by the Babylonians. And again, all of these events were prophesied in the Bible hundreds of years before they happened, and they are easily found to be true by historical artifacts and records. So now let's talk about the birth of Islam, 7th century BCE. According to Islamic tradition, Muhammad, the founder and prophet of Islam, was born in the small oasis town of Mecca in western Arabia in 571 CE. Islamic tradition tells us that in the year 610 AD, when he was 40 years old, Muhammad received his personal revelation and began preaching. His following and influence increased rapidly, but he was strongly resisted by some. And as a result, Muhammad was forced to leave Mecca, and in the year 622 CE, he set up his first community of followers in the distant town of Yathrib, later known as Medina. 10 years after leaving, Muhammad returned to Mecca with an army and conquered the city. According to Muslim belief, the Kaaba in Mecca is the holiest site in Islam. They believe it is the house of God built by Abraham and his handmaiden son Ishmael. After Muhammad's death in 632 AD, his successors, called Caliph, rapidly expanded the Muslim empire, usually through conquest. Within a couple of decades, the Arab Islamic Empire included virtually all of the Middle East, and Israel was under Islamic Muslim rule from the 7th through the 11th century until the Latin Crusaders invaded. But during that 400 years or so, Jewish and Christian communities were under Islamic domain while residing in Israel. Among the Arab caliphs' late 7th century conquest was the city of Jerusalem. Although Jerusalem itself is not mentioned by name in the Quran, the Islamic holy book, it was the original holy site chosen by Muhammad before he changed it to the Kaaba in Mecca. The disciples of the late Muhammad gave the city sacred status and constructed the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount. They believed that the rock itself was the place where Muhammad ascended to heaven during his night journey. The Temple Mount is the most prominent place in the old city of Jerusalem and may be the most contested piece of real estate on earth. The Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, standing atop the site of the former Jewish temple and above Christianity's holiest sites, reflect the Muslims' notion that Islam has replaced Judaism and Christianity. Now, let's talk about the Latin Kingdom, 1099 to 1231. Towards the end of the 11th century, Europeans launched the first of many Christian crusades to take the Holy Land back from the Muslims. They were successful in 1099. The Crusaders massacred both Jews and Muslims in the course of their crusade. Archaeological evidence of Latin Crusaders, their presence has been found at many Israel sites. Now, perhaps if you're like me and you're not a history buff, perhaps you've not quite enjoyed the presentation thus far. But hang with me, it takes a while to cover so many years, but we're getting closer to modern day. The return of Islamic rule, 1187 to 1917. The Latin Church maintained control of Israel from 1099 to 1187. Saladin recaptured the land almost entirely, including Jerusalem, but the Malamute Muslims gained strength to control Israel for nearly 300 years, beginning in 1291. After fighting off several Mongol invasions, many Arab Muslims in the 13th century began to form a majority in Israel, and they fled from the Mongols. At the beginning of the 16th century, the Ottoman Turks, the last of the greatest Islamic empires, had sovereignty in the area until they were defeated by the Allied powers in World War I. The vast majority of Jewish people lived outside Israel during this time, but however, in the 19th and early 20th centuries, conditions in the Ottoman Empire created an opportunity for the Jewish people to return to Israel. You see, at the end of World War I, the Allied powers gave the Arab people the Ottoman Empire's former territories, today Saudi Arabia, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Iraq. During the same period, they awarded Israel to the Jewish people. It is these two peoples, the Arabs and the Jews, that are in conflict today in Israel. So let's discuss Israel in the late 19th and 20th centuries. The population in Israel in the 19th century, as in the rest of the Ottoman Empire, was divided among religious lines and classes. The ruling community was Muslim. All others had inferior legal and political status. Within the Muslim community itself, there were sharp class divisions. The majority of the population were Arab fellahin, or tenant farmers, and owning elites, and controlled taxes payable to the Ottoman government. In the late 19th century, much of the land in Israel was difficult to farm, and most of it was either sand or marsh. Likewise, most of the land was sparsely populated, making agricultural settlement prohibitive. First-hand accounts of early 20th century Israel indicate that the focus of Jewish settlements was desolate terrain such as swampland, land that the Arab tenant farmers avoided as infertile and malaria-infested. Absentee Arab landowners, as well as local landowning elites, such as the al-Husseini family, a comrade of Adolf Hitler, sold excessive tracts of land at exorbitant prices to the Jewish people. Some of the Fellahin themselves also sold land to the Jews, and as a result, there were Fellahin Arab farmers and even entire Arab villages that disappeared because of land sales. Disenfranchised and aggrieved, these farmers would become part of the Arabs' emerging nationalistic struggle. Now let's discuss Jewish Zionism, late 19th and early 20th centuries. As we have learned from this and other broadcasts, the Jewish people have always had a presence in the land of Israel for thousands of years. They are indeed indigenous to the land. We have also learned of two mass population scatterings, we call them diasporas, during the Babylonian and the Roman Empire period. Anti-Semitism must be mentioned here. The hatred of Jews simply because they are Jews, and it's the oldest hatred in human history. It has resulted in mistreatment of Jews for centuries, including beatings, robberies, confiscation of property, forcing them out of the country, and even mass murder. There are several examples, but let me mention just a few. During the Spanish Inquisition of 1400s to 1800s, thousands of Jews were murdered as they would not convert to Christianity, and even if they did, they were treated very poorly afterwards. The Jews of Russia were victims of three large-scale pogroms from 1881 to 1921, each of which surpassed the preceding in scope and savagery, with murder, rape, and other vile treatment. And not to overlook the Holocaust of more recent years, when 6 million plus Jews were murdered in the Nazis' final solution to totally annihilate the Jewish people. The Jewish people must have a nation of their own in order to be able to withstand such persecutions as these. The idea came to be known as Zionism. Captain Alfred Dreyfus, a Jewish officer in the French army, was falsely accused of selling military secrets to the Germans and was subsequently sentenced to life imprisonment. A journalist covering the case was Theodor Herzl. He recognized the injustice of the Dreyfus case and the anti-Semitic behavior inspired in France. Herzl became convinced of the great vulnerability of the Jews in Europe and strongly felt that an independent Jewish state was the only chance the Jews had to survive. The birth of Zionism as a political movement with a stated aim to create for the Jewish people a legal and assured home in Palestine. Theodor Herzl is considered even today to be the father of modern political Zionism and, in effect, the founder of the State of Israel. After Herzl's death in 1904, Dr. Chaim Weizmann became the leader of the Zionist cause. He was instrumental in gaining the British government's support for the Jewish state in Palestine. World War I changed the course of history for both the Jews and the Arabs. The Jewish people's ties to their historic homeland became more pronounced at the end of the war. Their claim to the land has been a point of contention with the Arab peoples in the Middle East ever since. At a San Remo conference in 1920, the Allied powers, with the support of the 51 member states of the League of Nations, set in motion the events that would bring both peoples, Arabs and Jews, the right to govern themselves. The lands allocated for the Arab peoples encompassed most of the Middle East. The Jews were to have a small strip of land on the Mediterranean coast. This story is continued in case number 3 of this 6th series, entitled Jewish People's Reasoning for Their Claim to Israel. It is important that you find truth for yourself. Hopefully, what you have heard today will help you during that journey. However, don't trust mainstream media. They've been distorting facts for decades. Don't even trust what you've heard in this video. Do your own research and make up your own mind as to what is truth. Seek and you will find it. Now, if you would like to hear more about related topics, hit that subscribe button below, and if you please, click on the like button to let others know about what you've heard today. This is Wayne Ammons, helping you find truth, and I hope you will discover it for yourself. May God bless you.